The sound of a safety clicking off echoes louder than a thunderclap in a quiet room. It is 2 a.m. inside the 28th precinct. The air is thick, choking on the smell of stale tobacco, nervous sweat, and gun oil. The fluorescent lights hum with a dying, insect-like buzz that drills into the skull. 25 armed police officers are freezing in place. Their hands hover over their holsters. Their eyes are darting, wide with a primal realization that they have made a catastrophic mistake. These aren't rookies. These are men who have cracked heads in alleyways, men who have taken bribes in backrooms, men who believe they own the night. But tonight, they don't own anything. In the center of the room, sitting on a wooden bench, is a black man in an immaculate gray suit. He isn't shouting, he isn't moving, he is simply reading a newspaper. He acts as if the shotguns pointed at his chest are nothing more than a mild inconvenience. He turns the page with a crisp, dry snap that makes 3 officers flinch. The desk sergeant, a man named O'Malley with a neck as thick as a hydrant, is trembling. He knows that if one trigger is pulled, this building doesn't just become a crime scene, it becomes a tomb. He looks at the phone on his desk, wishing it would ring, wishing the commissioner would call, wishing for a miracle. Because the man reading the newspaper isn't just a criminal. And he isn't just a father. He is the man who owns the pavement these officers walk on. He is the man who decides which numbers play and which businesses stay open. He has just given them a simple choice: release his daughter or die. History books will tell you about the riots of 1943. They will tell you about the civil rights marches, the speeches, the legislation. They will tell you how power was negotiated in the back rooms of City Hall and the polished offices of Washington, D.C. They will show you photos of men in suits shaking hands, signing treaties, passing bills. But they never told you about this night. They never told you about the moment the law blinked. Most historians paint Ellsworth Bumpy Jhonson as a gangster, a savage, a man who dealt in numbers and narcotics, and he was all of those things. But what the records hide, what the police reports were too embarrassed to admit, was that Bumpy Jhonson understood a language older than the law. He knew that true power isn't about who has the badge, it's about who is willing to burn the city down to protect what is theirs. This isn't a story about a crime, it is a story about a transfer of sovereignty. It is the night the king of Harlem proved that a father's love is the most dangerous weapon in the world. To understand the man sitting on that bench, you cannot start with the man. You have to start with the girl. And to understand the girl, you have to understand the night that tried to swallow her whole. Imagine being 19 years old. The year is 1955. Harlem is a dual world. By day, it is a community of striving, of church hats and market stalls. But by night, under the neon glow of the jazz clubs, it is a different creature. Elise is walking down Lenox Avenue. The streetlights are flickering, casting long, fractured shadows against the brickwork. The night air is cool, but your skin feels hot, prickly. The sound of a saxophone drifts from a basement club, a mournful blue note that hangs in the humid air. She is young, she is bright, she has a future that doesn't involve the streets. She is the one thing her father has kept clean. You aren't doing anything wrong, you are just walking. Maybe you're coming home from a jazz club where you sipped a soda and watched the dancers. Maybe you were studying late at the library. It doesn't matter. Innocence is no defense when the predator is wearing a badge. A patrol car slows beside you. The tires crunch on the gravel. That sound, that specific, heavy, rolling sound of a police cruiser. It is a sound that activates a genetic memory of fear in Harlem. It is the sound of the shark entering the water. The car creeps along the curb, matching her pace. She speeds up. The car speeds up. She stops. The car stops. The window rolls down. The face inside is pale, sweaty, boredom mixed with malice. It's not a request, it's a command. Get in. Her heart hammers against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knows who she is. She knows her last name is Jhonson. But right now, in the dark, on the corner of 125th, that name feels less like a shield and more like a target. She tries to speak. Her voice is small, trembling. She tries to explain she lives just 2 blocks away. She points to the building. She says her father is expecting her. Mentioning the father was a mistake. The officer's eyes narrow. A cruel smile plays on his lips. Jhonson, the king. Let's see if his crown fits in a cell. The door opens. A hand grabs her wrist. It's rough, calloused. It pulls. The indignity of it burns worse than the grip. The realization that your body is not your own, that your freedom is conditional, that you can be plucked from your life simply because someone with a gun is bored. They don't arrest her for a crime. They arrest her to send a message. They drag her into the back seat, not because she broke the law, but because they want to rattle the cage of the lion. They want to see if the king of Harlem bleeds. They want to know if the man who scares them is mortal. She is shoved into the back of the cruiser. The cage separates her from the officers, but it doesn't separate her from their laughter. They are joking about her father. They are joking about what happens to girls who think they are royalty in a neighborhood owned by the NYPD. She sits there, tears hot on her cheeks, staring out the window as the familiar streets blur into a prison. She sees the corner store where she buys candy. She sees the stoop where she played as a child. It all looks distant now, separated by glass and steel. She is terrified, not just for herself, but for them. Because she knows something they don't. She knows the man who waits for her at home. She knows that her father is not a man who accepts messages. He is a man who returns them. And he usually returns them wrapped in lead or silence. The 28th Precinct was a fortress. In the mid-50s, it was an island of white authority in a sea of black frustration. The officers there didn't patrol Harlem, they occupied it. It was known as the meat grinder. They believed they were untouchable. They believed the badge was a magical talisman that protected them from the consequences of their cruelty. They believed that Harlem was a chaotic jungle that only they could tame. They processed the girl, fingerprints, the black ink staining her fingertips like shame, mugshot, the flashbulb blinding her, freezing her fear in silver nitrate. They put her in a holding cell with the drunks and the addicts, a place smelling of vomit, despair, and unwashed bodies. She sat on the cold concrete bench, pulling her coat tight around her shoulders to keep herself from touching the walls. She didn't scream. She didn't yell, "Do you know who I am?" She just waited. She closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of the station, the shouting, the slamming of heavy doors, the laughter of the guards. But beneath that noise, she sensed a shift, a vibration in the air. She knew the phone call had been made. She knew that someone, A watcher on the street, a friend of the family, had seen the arrest. Somewhere in the city, a telephone rang. It wasn't a golden palace, it was an apartment, tasteful, quiet, books lining the walls, philosophy, history, poetry. A chessboard sat on the table, a game paused in mid-move. White is winning, but black has a trap set 3 moves deep. A hand reaches out and picks up the receiver. The hand is manicured, steady. The voice on the other end is frantic, breathless, a lieutenant, a soldier, relaying the news. They took her, Bumpy. The 2-8, they have a lease. The room goes silent. The ticking of the grandfather clock seems to stop. Most men would shout. Most men would smash the phone. Most men would grab a gun and run out into the street screaming. Bumpy Jhonson did not shout. Those who knew him best said that his anger was not a fire, it was a drop in temperature. The room would suddenly feel like the windows had been blown out in the dead of winter. The air would grow thin. He hung up the phone, gently. He placed the receiver back in the cradle with care, ensuring it clicked into place. He stood up. He walked to the closet. He didn't grab a machine gun. He didn't grab a bat. He didn't grab a knife. He selected a tie, silk, deep burgundy, the color of dried blood. He tied it with slow, methodical precision, checking the knot in the mirror. He put on his cufflinks, gold, catching the light. He put on his jacket, smoothing the lapels. He adjusted the brim of his fedora so that it cast a shadow just over his eyes. He looked in the mirror. He didn't see a gangster. He saw a diplomat preparing to declare war. He saw a father who had failed to protect his child and who was now going to rectify that failure with absolute totality. He walked out of his apartment, and the moment his shoe hit the pavement, the atmosphere of the street changed. It was subtle at first, a nod to a doorman, a glance at a newsstand owner. The boys on the corner stopped rolling dice. The music from the club down the street seemed to lower in volume. The laughter died in throats. The king was moving, and when the king moved, the city held its breath. He got into his car, a black Cadillac, polished to a mirror shine. But he didn't go alone. He didn't make a speech to his men. He didn't stand on a crate and rally the troops. He didn't need to. They knew. Word spreads in Harlem faster than electricity. It travels on the wind. It travels through the glances exchanged between men who know the score. By the time Bumpy's car turned onto 123rd Street, shadows were detaching themselves from the alleyways. Men in long coats, men with hard eyes, men who had served time and men who had served in wars, men who owed Bumpy money and men who owed Bumpy their lives. They didn't run, they walked, a silent, growing tide following the Cadillac. They came from the pool houses, they came from the barber shops, they came from the rooftops. Bumpy didn't look back. He drove slowly, 5 miles per hour, a funeral pace. He wanted the police to see him coming. He wanted them to have time to think. He wanted the anticipation to rot their confidence from the inside out. The Cadillac pulled up to the curb in front of the 28th precinct. The engine cut. Silence. No sirens, no shouting, just the cooling tick of the engine and the sound of hundreds of shoes scraping against the asphalt. Bumpy stepped out. He smoothed his jacket. He looked up at the stone facade of the police station. It was designed to intimidate. It was designed to make people feel small. It was a monument to the state's monopoly on violence. Bumpy Jhonson looked at it the way a landlord looks at a tenant who is late on rent. He looked at it like he was deciding whether to renovate it or demolish it. He walked up the steps, alone. His men stayed back. They lined the street, 10 of them, then 20, then 50, then 100. They stood on the rooftops. They stood in the doorways. They didn't show weapons. They just stood there, arms crossed, watching the windows of the station. A silent siege, a wall of human resolve. Bumpy pushed open the heavy double doors of the precinct and stepped inside. The station was buzzing, typewriters clacking, phones ringing, officers joking, drinking coffee, processing the nightly catch, the mundane bureaucracy of oppression. The noise died instantly. It started at the front desk and rippled backward like a wave. Heads turned. Conversations froze mid-sentence. A coffee cup paused halfway to a mouth. Bumpy walked to the center of the room. His footsteps were heavy, deliberate. Click, click, click. The sound echoed off the tile floors. He stopped in front of the desk sergeant, O'Malley, the man with the red face and the reputation. O'Malley had been king of this desk for 10 years. He had sent men to prison for looking at him wrong. O'Malley looked down at Bumpy. He sneered. He tried to summon the authority of the state. He tried to remember that he was the law. "You're in the wrong place, Jhonson. Visiting hours are over." Bumpy looked at him. His eyes were dark, unreadable pools. There was no anger in them, only a terrifying clarity. "I'm not here to visit," Bumpy said. His voice was soft, smooth, like gravel wrapped in velvet. It carried across the room without him raising it a decibel. "I'm here to collect." "Collect what?" laughed O'Malley, looking around at his fellow officers for support. He needed them to laugh too. He needed to break the tension. "You're not buying tickets here, boy." "My daughter," Bumpy said. "Elise, you have her. I want her." O'Malley leaned forward, his knuckles white on the desk. "She's being processed, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct. Maybe she gets out in the morning, maybe she doesn't. Now get out of my station before I throw you in the cell next to her." This was the moment, the tipping point. In any other precinct, with any other man, this is where the batons would come out. This is where the shouting would start. This is where the violence would erupt. But Bumpy didn't shout. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply looked at his watch, a gold Rolex. He checked the time. "I'll wait," he said. And then he did the unthinkable. He turned his back on the sergeant. He turned his back on the armed officers. He walked over to the wooden bench in the middle of the room. He sat down. He crossed his legs. He pulled a newspaper from under his arm. And he began to read. He read the headlines. He read the sports section. He read the obituaries. O'Malley turned purple. The veins in his neck bulged. This was an insult. This was a challenge to the very foundation of law and order. A black man, sitting in his station, ignoring him. "Get him out of here!" O'Malley roared. His voice cracked. 2 officers stepped forward, big men, hands on their nightsticks. They marched toward the bench. They were ready to break bones. They were eager for it. "Jhonson, on your feet, now!" Bumpy turned a page of the newspaper. He didn't look up. He adjusted his glasses. "Officer," Bumpy said, reading an article about the Yankees, "I suggest you look out the window." The officer paused. The calm in Bumpy's voice threw him off. He frowned. He looked at Bumpy, then he looked at the window. He walked over to the glass and peered out into the darkness. The officer's face went pale. All the color drained out of him in a second. He stepped back as if the window had burned him. His hand went to his mouth. "Sarge, you better look at this." O'Malley stumped over. "What is it?" He looked out. The street was full. Hundreds of men, silent, motionless. They were lined up along the sidewalk. They were on the stoops across the street, and in the dim light of the street lamps, you could see the glint of steel. Shotguns, pistols, tire irons. It wasn't a mob. A mob is chaotic. A mob is loud. This was an army, disciplined, waiting. And they were all looking at the front door of the precinct, waiting for a signal, waiting for the doors to open or for a shot to be fired. O'Malley looked back at Bumpy. Bumpy was checking the stock prices. He looked completely at peace. "What is this?" O'Malley hissed. "What have you done?" Bumpy finally looked up. He took off his glasses. He folded them and placed them in his pocket. "That," Bumpy said, vaguely gesturing toward the window, "is the jury, and they are very impatient." The tension in the room shifted. It went from a police station to a hostage situation, but the police were the hostages. O'Malley reached for the phone. His hand was shaking so bad he almost dropped the receiver. "I'm calling the captain. I'm calling the riot squad." "You could do that," Bumpy said calmly, "but the riot squad is 20 minutes away. My men are 20 feet away." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His eyes bored into O'Malley's soul. "If I don't walk out of here with my daughter in 10 minutes, Sergeant, I'm afraid there won't be a 28th Precinct anymore. I will bring this building down brick by brick with all of you inside it." He wasn't bluffing. O'Malley could see it in his eyes. There was no fear, no hesitation. Bumpy Jhonson had calculated the odds, weighed the costs, and decided that his daughter was worth a war. He was willing to die tonight as long as he took everyone else with him. The phone in O'Malley's hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He looked at his men. They were terrified. They were looking to him for leadership, but he had none to give. The other officers had drawn their guns now. They were pointing them at Bumpy. 5.38 specials aimed at his chest. "Put the guns down," O'Malley said softly. "Sarge?" "I said, put them down," O'Malley screamed. He knew that if they shot Bumpy Jhonson right there, the men outside would storm the building. They would slaughter every cop in the room before the first siren wailed. It would be a massacre. Bumpy watched the guns go down. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just waited. O'Malley stared at Bumpy. He hated him. He hated him with every fiber of his being. He hated him because Bumpy had exposed the lie. He had shown them that their power only existed because he allowed it to exist. "Bring her up," O'Malley spat. "Get her out of here." The order echoed down the hall. The minutes that followed were the longest in the history of the precinct. The clock on the wall ticked. Tick, tick, tick. Bumpy folded his newspaper. He placed it neatly on the bench beside him. He stood up and buttoned his jacket. He brushed a speck of invisible dust from his sleeve. The metal door at the back of the room clanged open. Elise walked out. She looked small, frightened. Her coat was rumpled. Her eyes were red. She looked around the room, seeing the officers with their hands on their holsters, the tension vibrating in the air like a high-tension wire. Then she saw him, her father, standing in the middle of the wolves, untouched. She ran to him. She buried her face in his chest. Bumpy didn't hug her, not there, not in front of them. He placed a hand on her shoulder, firm, protective, a claim of ownership, a signal to every man in the room, mine. He looked at O'Malley one last time. He wanted O'Malley to remember this face. "Good night, Sergeant," Bumpy said. He turned and guided his daughter toward the door. Every officer in the room watched them go. They wanted to shoot. They wanted to scream. They wanted to reclaim their dignity. But they didn't do a damn thing. They were paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the man's will. Bumpy pushed the doors open and walked out into the cool night air. When the doors opened, a murmur went through the crowd outside, a ripple of relief. Bumpy raised his hand, once, a simple gesture. The army of men in the street didn't cheer, they didn't shout, they didn't fire their guns in the air. They simply turned and melted back into the shadows. They disappeared into the alleyways, the doorways, the night. The threat evaporated as quickly as it had arrived. Bumpy opened the car door for Elise. She slid in. He got in the driver's side. He started the engine. The Cadillac purred to life. As they drove away, leaving the precinct behind, Elise looked at her father. His hands were steady on the wheel. His face was calm, illuminated by the passing streetlights. "Daddy," she whispered, "what did you do?" Bumpy looked at the road ahead, the lights of Harlem reflected in his eyes. He thought about the men outside. He thought about the guns. He thought about the precarious nature of power. "I just reminded them," he said quietly. "I reminded them who pays the rent." That night, the legend of Bumpy Jhonson changed. Before, he was a gangster. He was a man to be feared. He was a ruthless operator who cleared the board of his enemies. But after the incident at the 28th Precinct, he became something else. He became a myth. People whispered about it in the barber shops and the beauty parlors. "Did you hear? Bumpy stared down the whole force without a gun. He walked into the lion's den and took his cub back." It wasn't just about bravery. It was about dignity. In a time when black men were expected to look down, to step off the sidewalk, to say yes sir and no sir, Bumpy Jhonson walked into the belly of the beast and forced it to spit his daughter out. He showed Harlem that the law wasn't absolute, that power could be challenged, that a black man could stand his ground and win. Of course, the police didn't forget. They harassed him for years. They arrested him a dozen more times. They raided his spots. They tried to break him. They tapped his phones. They followed his cars. But they never looked at him the same way again. When they looked at him, they remembered the man reading the newspaper. They remembered the silence. They remembered the fear they felt when they looked out that window and saw the city staring back at them. We like to believe that power is written on paper. We think it lives in gavels, in badges, in signed legislation. We think it comes from elections and appointments. But the truth that Bumpy Jhonson knew, is that power is perception. It is the ability to make your enemy believe that destroying you will cost them more than they can afford to pay. It is the ability to project strength so absolute that violence becomes unnecessary. On that night in 1955, Bumpy Jhonson didn't use violence. He used the promise of violence. He used the weight of his reputation. He used the love of a father to checkmate the entire legal system of New York City. He taught us that a king isn't defined by the crown he wears. He is defined by what he is willing to do to protect his blood. And in the end, perhaps that is the only law that truly matters. The law of the jungle? No, the law of the father. If you enjoyed this story, click the like button and subscribe. Next time, we'll uncover the secret meeting between Bumpy and Malcolm X that the FBI tried to erase.